Welcome back. Most of you remember Ramtha, the 35,000-year-old entity allegedly channeled through J.Z. Knight, who lives in Yelm, Washington.
Today, in the opinion of three of our guests, you will hear what goes on behind the scenes of Ramtha's retreats at the Yelm estate. First of all, meet Jay-Z's ex-husband, Jeff Knight. He says 1,000 people are crammed into an arena without food facilities or sanitary facilities for an entire week. He also claims that he was forced to accept a small divorce settlement because he says Jay-Z threatened to expose the fact that he had tested positive for the HIV virus.
And meet Linda Baker. She says she had spent some $20,000 going to these retreats, and she says they emphasize suffering, deprivation, and cruelty. She says people have been trampled and injured during these sessions, and that they are told not to help one another. And this is a woman we shall call Melissa today. She says in the last couple of years, the Ramtha organizers have locked the gates at the Yelm estate so that people who want to leave cannot do so without permission. She says people like her have spent thousands of dollars for what she describes as nothing. We believe these are the first followers to come forward and speak publicly in any detail about what they say they experienced during these Ramtha sessions. Welcome them all, please, to the show. Thanks for coming. We appreciate you being here, and we are interested to hear your opinions in this matter. Jeff, you have filed a suit, and you indicate within it that you were forced to accept a small, considering the millions that are being made here, a very small settlement because of what you describe as blackmail? Is that too strong a word?
Not, in my opinion, it's not too strong of a word by any means.
What happened in your view?
It was my wife, and my wife knew during our marriage I was tested for the HIV virus and tested positive about 2 years into our marriage, and we stayed together for the next 3 years in a very normal, as natural marriage setting as possible. And at the end of our marriage, when she decided that she had had enough and she'd met another young man that was 19 years old when she met him, she decided to separate from me. And we separated for a couple of months, and the divorce proceedings started to go into action, and we had the lawyers from both sides telling us both what was going on, and the next thing I decided to do is ask her if we could sit down and meet and talk about this thing, you know, as husband and wife that are trying to come out with a impeccable settlement. And when we sat down to talk, she told me I would never get another dime, that she would expose me, and that
expose your illness?
Expose my illness, expose my past, you know, everything she knew about me. She threatened she would expose about me. And I, you know, like I said, I was tested HIV positive 2 or 3 years prior to this, so I was living under the guise of Ramtha's teachings that I could heal myself through his teachings, and only through his teachings. That was the first time that I sat down with him after I was tested positive. He said, the only way you'll heal yourself is through these teachings, and I will teach you how.
But to address the subject just for a moment, Jeff, of the divorce, there was a settlement that you both at one point signed off on it.
Right.
And so what you're attempting to do now is to reopen this thing,
right,
thinking maybe that you are owed additional settlement monies.
Right.
How would you react to the charge to people who might say, well, Jeff is just an angry, disgruntled husband, and now on top of that he is battling an illness, and so he sees a source of money and has decided to go after it?
Yeah. I don't think I'm disgruntled at all. I think I was blackmailed, coerced into settling for a meager pittance of what we had in the way of assets, in the way of income. I had sat by this woman's side and built this Ramtha Dialogues to be what it was at that time, what it's become to this day. I built a horse business with this lady and walked away from all of that because...
Roughly, how much money are we talking about? How much might she earn in a year?
In the millions.
Millions of dollars
Millions
every
of
year.
dollars every year.
And that's not an exaggerated
That's
statement.
not a, it's,
In the range of 2,
Not at
10, 50?
you know, in the high millions at this time, I would say.
Okay. Give us an idea of what these retreats are like. What do you remember happening at these retreats?
Going into events and listening to lectures for hours on end, and sitting and doing breathing exercises in a lotus position for hours, breathing until you were hyperventilating and creating a natural high, being put into like a trance state during the course of this, having this loud pounding music with drums pounding in our ears so loud that I couldn't imagine what older people must have felt like, because they weren't raised with loud blaring music.
How many people at one time?
1,000 people at one
1,000
time.
people.
Oh yeah.
And how many days would this go on?
This would go on for 7 days to 14 days at a time at retreats, and on weekend events it'd just be for the 2 days.
Was this your experience, Linda? Is this the kind of thing that you went through in the Ramtha sessions?
Oh, yeah, some of it is.
What was the stated purpose? Where were you trying to get through these sessions?
Well, I think everybody has within them an innate desire to know who and what God is. Mm-hmm. And so in my desire, my quest to know God and to understand what God is and the meaning of life, I got involved in this school.
Let me ask from a practical standpoint, where did 1,000 of you go? Where did you sleep?
In the arena.
In the arena on the ground?
On the ground.
Yes.
That's where we were from the moment we walked in the arena. There's no chairs.
Is there no chairs? No. Lots of room in the arena? I mean, do you have plenty of room to sleep, or you?
No, we're in spaces of 2 by 5 was the size of each cubicle that each person had to lay in. So a person even as tall as me, which I'm not a huge man, could not lay straight out to be able to relax and sleep. And you had your feet in someone's head and someone's feet in, behind your head, and you sleep like that every night.
Were there adequate bathroom facilities?
There was urinals and toilets, but no showers. People were using the same sink to wash off their muddy boots, clean off their plates, wash their hands, wash their face in the morning, brush their teeth. All these things are going on at the same time in the same sink.
Food?
Food, yeah, absolutely. The food was brought most of the time by people themselves.
The participants brought their own food.
Right, you were responsible for your own food. There was a catering business that started up, but it did not succeed, and so that was...
Could you cook in there?
No.
So it was just snack things people brought?
Right. Well, they would bring sandwiches, things that they could make to be some kind of a meal for them, but it was rough in it.
But obviously you couldn't bring food that could be refrigerated and last for 2 weeks if you were going to be able to do a long
you had your cars in the parking lot, and you could leave your, ice chest in the car, but if you weren't allowed to leave the ranch, your ice was probably melted after 2 or 3 days.
Obviously not the best of conditions.
Right.
Now, Linda says she began to feel she should leave all of this when she heard people say that they had to go out into the woods blindfolded for the night and often longer. She says she began to find some real inconsistencies also in J.Z. Knight's stories. We'll hear about those when we come back.
I should say, and we are talking with J.Z. Knight's ex-husband, Jeff. Linda, what is the tank?
The tank is a maze. It's like a maze or a labyrinth, and it's, I don't know exactly how big it would be because it kind of varied. When it first started out, it was smaller, and then as the school or classes progressed, the tank would become larger.
Tell us what you were asked to do in the tank.
Okay, well, first you had to find your way to the tank. We would be taken back into one of the stallion paddocks and blindfolded, and then you would have duct tape put over the blindfolds to kind of, I guess, prevent being able to have a, quick peek.
We do want people to know, and you to know, too, that we're looking at an aerial view of what you're describing as you're talking, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. So anyway, once you were blindfolded and the duct tape on, then you would have to find your way from this paddock to the tank, and that would mean crossing across, field area, through a stream, through fences, or blindfolded. Or you could end up in the parking lot, there would be quite a few cars, which could turn into a real interesting experience.
And with 1,000 people, I would imagine there was confusion and running into one another. How did you solve those problems?
Well,
Were people knocked down?
Yeah, did people get hurt?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
People were
Yeah.
in another exercise where we're just in a big paddock and we're going across the field from all four corners, 1,000 people. We were told at one time to run because we needed to get over our fear of hurting ourselves. He had us running, and people were bashing into each other, breaking ankles, breaking legs, van loads of people being hauled off to the emergency hospital, and the emergency hospital is going, what's going on here? And
what was going on there in terms of what was the point of the exercise?
well, the point at that point was to get us over our fear of hurting ourselves. He had us at one point get down into the dust of the paddock and throw dirt on ourselves and people tackling each other just to get beyond this fear. You know, he said little kids will go out and hurt themselves and they'll get right back up and go out and play, and you guys are so afraid you're going to break something that you walk around like fragile little delicate things.
Well, did you help each other? Could you take the blindfolds off?
No, we weren't allowed to help each other. We were, even the employees were told to leave us alone. When we were in the tank or on the field, we were left alone to figure it out for ourselves, and we had to put our focus somewhere and let this God of our being pull us there. And if we were doing it right, we wouldn't hit anybody, but most of us didn't do it right because we all ran into each other. It's just to what degree you got a finger up your nose or, someone bashing you in the eye or someone breaking a leg.
Melissa, were you involved ever in this exercise called Paradise Beach?
Yes, it was.
Tell us what that was all about.
It's a focusing exercise in which we go out and sit in one of the paddocks, the stone paddock usually, and just sit on the ground for anything from 2 to 3 days.
In one spot?
2 or 3.
In one spot.
What did you eat?
Well, in the beginning we were allowed a handful of food, and most recently nothing.
And of course in the Northwest it isn't always 75 and sunny. How about protection from the elements?
Well, we sort of provided that for ourselves, tarps, or most of us took sleeping bags, that sort of thing.
To your knowledge, were there illnesses that resulted from this kind of activity?
I have never been to an event at the ranch when I wasn't sick afterwards.
What kind of sick?
For me, primarily upper respiratory, which is, I think, what most people had, and a number of times diarrhea.
You guys, let me start with Melissa. Why did you go back?
Well, that's part of why I quit. There's a kind of mind control or brainwashing that goes on in which the thinking is solipsistic. Anything that you question is answered within the system. So if you get sick, you're not sick, you're transmuting. So it's a good thing, it's not a bad thing. And so everything that happens, if you question it or you don't like it, it's because there's something wrong with you, not with the system.
What made you go back, Linda?
Well, once I started seriously questioning these things, I didn't go back. Once I started really investigating this for myself and asking serious questions, I did not go back.
Did you go just the one time? Or were there a couple visits?
You mean to the school?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the school started in, May of '88, and I started listening to the teachings in '85.
Okay.
So I quit this last fall.
All right. Jamie has a question in the audience.
Primarily upper respiratory, which is, I think, what most people had, and a number of times diarrhea.
You guys, let me start with Melissa. Why did you go back?
Well, that's part of why I quit. There's a kind of mind control or brainwashing that goes on in which the thinking is solipsistic. Anything that you question is answered within the system. So if you get sick, you're not sick, you're transmuting. So it's a good thing, it's not a bad thing. And so everything that happens, if you question it or you don't like it, it's because there's something wrong with you, not with the system.
What made you go back, Linda?
Well, once I started seriously questioning these things, I didn't go back. Once I started really investigating this for myself and asking serious questions, I did not go back.
Did you go just the one time? Or were there a couple visits?
You mean to the school?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the school started in, May of '88, and I started listening to the teachings in '85.
Okay.
So I quit this last fall.
All right. Jamie has a question in the audience. Go ahead.
I was wondering, when you're telling your story, I hear you say he a lot when speaking of Ramtha, and I just wondered if you actually believe that there is such a thing.
I don't believe it any longer, but I did for years, and I think that was just part of the brainwashing that I learned to separate Ramtha from Jay-Z, my wife. And if you came to an event and you kept saying she, I'd say, you know, he. I'd correct you because I had to make that distinction myself. But I no longer, there is no distinction, but it's a programming that I'm still trying to become unprogrammed from saying that. I don't even realize sometimes I'm doing it, or I think I need to do it for clarity, for people to understand. I'm talking about the entity that she purports to channel versus the woman that I married.
Does this entity, Ramtha, exist for you, Linda, at this point?
No, and for me, no, never has.
Okay. Never has.
I mean, well, actually, at one time did, but
not now.
Not anymore. No,
Okay.
no longer.
We'll take a break. Now, Melissa gave up a $150,000 a year job to dedicate herself to Ramtha. Now, she says, her life is pretty much devastated. More when we come back. All right. Jamie has a question in the audience. Go ahead.
I was wondering, when you're telling your story, I hear you say he a lot when speaking of Ramtha, and I just wondered if you actually believe that there is such a thing.
I don't believe it any longer, but I did for years, and I think that was just part of the brainwashing that I learned to separate Ramtha from Jay-Z, my wife. And if you came to an event and you kept saying she, I'd say, you know, he. I'd correct you because I had to make that distinction myself. But I no longer, there is no distinction, but it's a programming that I'm still trying to become unprogrammed from saying that. I don't even realize sometimes I'm doing it, or I think I need to do it for clarity, for people to understand. I'm talking about the entity that she purports to channel versus the woman that I married.
Does this entity, Ramtha, exist for you, Linda, at this point?
No, and for me, no, never has.
Okay. Never has.
I mean, well, actually, at one time did, but
not now.
Not anymore. No, no longer.
We'll take a break. Now, Melissa gave up a $150,000 a year job to dedicate herself to Ramtha. Now, she says, her life is pretty much devastated. More when we come back.
Phone caller on the line. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yes, this is Cheryl Soderstrom, and I guess I was just wondering how people were foolish enough to be taken in by the cults.
Well, you want to handle that, Linda?
Well, I've just come to the decision that everybody does something in their life that someone else will consider foolish. You know.
What an interesting answer.
But yours,
yeah.
yours began, as you have explained before, with an honest search
To know
for a
God.
clearer understanding of life and how it works and where it may lead. And
Now,
perhaps, is that how it begins for
Melissa
everybody?
gave up a $150,000 a year job, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Tell us what that drive was to give up that kind of seemingly successful career.
Well, like Linda, I'd always had a lot of questions about the nature of the universe and God and our part in that, and Ramtha and his teachings seemed to answer that. The original teachings were full of love and joy and freedom and sort of peace. And it would have been worth anything to me to learn the kinds of things that were promised in the beginning of the school.
Do either of you have children who were part of this
No.
program? Linda?
No, I have a son, but he was not. No.
Melissa, tell us when the feeling at the retreats took on a kind of a different feeling, and what was that feeling?
For me, it began approximately a year ago. In my feeling, our civil rights began to be really infringed upon, meaning that we didn't have the freedom to come and go as we choose. The gates are locked, the doors are locked, you may not leave without permission. They began to tell people what they could and couldn't do outside of events, who they could be friends with, with whom they could do business. If we see another channel, we're thrown out of the school, and nobody's going to tell me with whom I can be friends.
Were you encouraged not to talk about your experiences in the retreats and in the school?
That's one of my agreements with the school.
You all refer to it as a school.
Well, it was called Ramtha School of, it is still called Ramtha School of Enlightenment.
Ah, okay.
Could I also want to say that
Sure.
for me, Ramtha does exist. And,
Still now today.
well, of course, he's an entirely different issue for me than Jay-Z.
Okay.
Let's talk about money just for a moment. What did all this cost you, Melissa?
I figured up yesterday after your producer asked me approximately $35,000 in the last 3 years, which does not include moving cross country and losing my job.
And lost income, sure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
$35,000 out of pocket.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that level of expenditure in terms of what you got back for it?
I don't think you'd want me to say that on the air.
Okay. Is there a polite way you can say it?
I think one receives value from any experience, and this was a very expensive lesson.
Okay.
We'll take a phone call. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Sherry, and I wanted to comment on some of the things that Jeff and Kathy had said.
Can you do it real quick,
They
Sherry?
had indicated that you are not allowed to take baths and not allowed to eat except the food that you bring. And as far as participating in some of the things that Ramtha wants you to participate in, you are allowed to leave the ranch at any time you so desire, and you do not have to participate in anything.
Oh, are you part of the school?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have to get permission to leave when the gates are locked?
No. Well, you have to have someone open them for you, but you can leave anytime you would like.
Okay, would you stay on the line with us for just a second?
Sure.
Thanks. We'll take a short break, and we'll get back to you when we come back.
Be right back. A statement made by the lady on the phone. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. The gates are locked, and you are not allowed to leave without permission.
Is permission reasonably withheld or unreasonably withheld, I should say?
One evening, I wanted to leave an evening event. It took me half an hour to get permission. I couldn't just walk out.
Mm-hmm. Sherry, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
They've all talked about the tank and people being blindfolded and getting hurt in the tank. Are you aware of any of that?
I have never been hurt. I've been here for over a year, and I've never been hurt.
You know of anyone else who has?
Simple bruises, maybe running into a fence, but I've done worse damage at home.
Do you see the point of that exercise?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
A lot of that information I don't know if I want to give out.
Okay, fair enough. Have you done the Paradise Beach?
Yes, I have.
How long were you outside?
How long was I outside? Overnight.
Overnight. And are you able to help us understand what you gained from that?
Inside into my own self.
Okay. Were you left without food?
You could eat if you wanted to. It was requested that you don't, so that you can have your focus on finding the insight on your own self. But if you needed to get up and eat or go to the bathroom, you can. No one's going to stop you from doing that.
Sherry, how long have you been involved with
That's also not
in the
true.
Ramtha school?
A little over a year.
And will you continue?
Yes, I am.
You feel you're benefiting from it?
Oh, most definitely. I think it was Kathy who had said that she had lost the $150,000 job to do this. Well, some people come with nothing, and I know I came with nothing, and my life was, everything was totally distraught, what was going on in my life at that time, and now it has changed tenfold. I mean...
Linda, would you encourage people others that you know to get involved with the school?
No, I wouldn't. Not now, I wouldn't.
And Jeff, I assume you wouldn't either.
No, I wouldn't. And I'd like to make a little comment about the...
Very briefly,
Quick as you
we're out of
can.
time.
Yeah. Some people may come, with very little, but a lot of people end up with very little to go to the school. They give everything they have to go to an event before they put food in their stomach, a roof over their head, or their children get what they need.
I regret that we're out of time. Thank you all for sharing your
Very
stories.
much.
And Sherry, thanks for calling. We'll be back after this break.